this moment, face into the wind. Northern places we may meet again.
I remember being at the Ilulissat Ice Fjord. This is a place where you walk up this hill and you look out and all you see is ice stretched out for kilometers and kilometers as far as the eye can see. And I remember it was 200 of us there, again, scientists, historians, musicians, youth from all over the world. And in that moment when all of us were just there looking at this ice, all of us went silent for a moment. I still remember the pin drop silence and hearing the ice melting. Millions of drops of the purest water on the planet going into the freshest body of water that exists.
That's Abhay Singh Sachal. He took part in our Arctic expedition with Students on Ice as a 14-year-old back in 2016. Since then, he has gone on to do some amazing things. He's now just 23 years old, so he's younger than Students on Ice is. He's the co-founder of Break the Divide, a non-profit organization that bridges gaps between youth in different communities, particularly Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Abhay has been recognized as one of the top 25 under 25 environmentalists in Canada, and he also just received the King Charles III Coronation Medal, recognizing the work he's done in climate justice and community building. Way to go, Abhay. I'm really thrilled to have Abhay as our guest today on Greatest Classroom on Earth, 25 years of Students on Ice inspiring youth at the ends of the earth. Hi, I'm Geoff Green, founder and expedition leader of Students on Ice. In 1999, an idea was born. Imagine if we could bring youth from around the world on educational expeditions to the polar regions, the cornerstones of our global ecosystem, and how that inspiring experience might shape their perspectives and even their futures.
Good morning, Students on Ice. It's going to be a great day.
In December of 2000, our maiden voyage to Antarctica began in what we now call the Greatest Classroom on Earth. And the rest is history. Students on Ice has now taken over 4,000 diverse students to the Arctic and the Antarctic, alongside educators, elders, scientists, artists, musicians, and all kinds of incredible leaders from more than 55 countries. The world has changed a lot over those 25 years, and it's still changing, as we all know. But our mission to connect youth to nature, to culture, policy, leadership opportunities, and to each other remains consistent and strong. This podcast celebrates 25 years of that impact of Students on Ice, sharing stories from those who were there, our alumni. I'm really excited to be joined now by 2016 alum Abhay Singh Sachal. Abhay, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here, Jeff. It's great to be chatting.
It's so good. It's great to see you. We haven't connected for a long time, have we?
No, it's been years. It's again, looking back, it's real. I'm realizing that this will be 9 years since the expedition in 2025.
Jeepers. It's insane. It's so crazy. Well, you look good. You look the same, a little bit older, but don't we all? Before we get into kind of the Students on Ice story,
yeah,
I'd love to know about you, your early days. Like, where are you from, and what were you like as a kid?
Oh, that's a great question. I thought I'd be diving right into I was thinking and reflecting last night about what the SOI experience was like for me. No, I'm from Surrey, BC. So I grew up in Surrey, which is about 40 minutes out of Vancouver. And growing up in Surrey, I think, was a very interesting experience for me. I was 11 months old when my parents and I and my brother immigrated. And so Surrey in Canada, to that regard, has been the only home that I've ever known, you know? Growing up, I was super involved in a lot of different things. I was 9 years old when my parents were taking my brother, who was 7 years older than me at that time, so I guess he was around 16. They were taking my brother to a community Toastmasters class. And I was just there with him. It's not like my parents intended to enroll me into that Toastmasters class, because it was 13 up. But the leader of that Toastmasters group, and Toastmasters is public speaking for anyone who doesn't know, the leader of that group saw me and was just like, oh, why don't you invite him to be a part of the group too? Let's welcome him in. And my parents were like, oh, are you guys sure? Like, he's only 9. And I was like, okay. And so I think 6 months later, I gave a big talk about the future of the city of Surrey. I think it was a 5-minute talk in front of a group of 200 people.
Amazing.
And looking back at that, I think, there's been a lot of sort of these key moments in my life, whether it's that Toastmasters experience or the 2016 Arctic expedition that I look back at and I'm like, wow, like I'm so glad that those things happened because it really helped shift the trajectory of my life in so many ways. And so I grew up playing hockey. I grew up playing piano. Growing up playing hockey and piano, those were things that kept me super involved. And I remember the first time I went on the ice, I wasn't really great, but and again, I think back to just my parents wanting to meet me to play hockey as a very Canadian thing to do. And again, I look back and I'm really grateful just that my dad and my mom, like they had no experience of ice hockey, but my dad would wake me up at 5 a.m. and drive me to the practices. And by the time I was 16, 17 years old, that's when our practices would be at like 11 p.m. midnight. Yeah. And so just that whole spectrum of the hockey experience too, like that was really me growing up. Like, a lot of different activities I was involved in, really close to my family and really close to the community in Surrey. And I think that really shaped a lot of, how my SOI, but broader sort of advocacy and then like learning journey developed.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. Let's start by going back to 2016 and your Arctic expedition. How did you first even hear about Students on Ice and how to apply and get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. Folks always ask me this actually whenever I tell them about Students on Ice. They're like, how did you hear about this organization that takes people to the Arctic and Antarctic? Like, it seems unfathomable to a lot of people. Like, how does this happen? I think I learned about Students on Ice from my older brother at the time. He was at McGill doing his undergrad there. And I think he had a friend at McGill or someone he knew that was on a Students on Ice expedition. I remember just my brother telling me like, hey, you should apply to this. And so again, at 14, I did.
And that's like, you're right at the edge. Like 14, you're one of the youngest probably in history.
I think I was on 2016. Oh, in history. Okay.
Well,
Geoff.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not, but pretty darn close.
Totally.
So, but it showed how, well, it shows the type of student that you were back then to apply, to take that leap. Yeah. And then I guess at some point we must have contacted you and said, guess what? You're coming. Do you remember that?
I think I do. I think it was a morning when I was in the shower. I think I might have had my parents CC'd on the email because I think parents got the email at the same time too. And so I think it was like 8 a.m. I'm running late for school because I'm not really a morning person. And I haven't told the story in a while. I remember just my phone was in my room. I was getting ready for the day, but my dad saw the email and he was knocking on the shower door, just like, check your phone. And so I remember just getting out of the shower and going outside. And my dad was like, oh, you're going to the Arctic. And so I checked my phone and I saw the details. And again, I reflected back on my application. Like I talked about meeting polar bears and I talked about, solving climate change. I explicitly remember using those words and telling people in the lead up to the expedition, I'm going to go to the Arctic to solve climate change. And so that was where my head was at that time.
Well, that's such a great memory. So away you go. And I think we all met in Ottawa before we flew up to Iqaluit. And can you take us back to the moment you first kind of joined and started meeting everybody, and I guess when you first arrived up in Nunavut?
Yeah, I was so nervous, Geoff. I remember just my parents dropped me off at the meeting spot in Ottawa. We had just been in New York City actually for a family wedding or something, and so came to Ottawa from New York City. And I remember just again being very nervous, not knowing what to expect. I felt like I hadn't packed properly. I felt like I wouldn't be prepared for the cold. I just had all these thoughts going through my mind. But I remember just meeting, the facilitators, SOI, like staff, and feeling ready to go. And I remember the big orientation that we had in a big hall. And then before
Museum
I knew
of Nature, probably.
Museum of Nature. Yeah. I think that's it. And before I knew it, I guess we were on the flight to Iqaluit. And I just remember talking to people. Like, again, I was young, but I was really social. And I remember just talking to everyone around me about like, oh, hey, where are you from? What are you doing? I'm from Surrey.
I remember this little kid from Surrey being a very talkative fellow, actually. But that was a really special journey. And in fact,
Yeah.
to prepare for our chat today, I looked at the one of the videos from the
Oh,
journey,
yeah.
and they all bring back such memeries. And that
Yeah.
expedition was full of some really great people, as they always are. But David Serkowak, I don't
Yes.
know if you remember David,
Oh,
Annie
absolutely.
Petalowsi, Whitney
Yeah.
Lockenbauer, David
Whitney.
Gray, Caitlin Bakey, Matali Okalik, and of course, Dr. Fred Roots.
Yes.
And that was Fred's very last expedition with
It
Students on Ice
was.
before he passed away.
Wow. Yeah.
So
What a gift.
it was a gift for all of us, but for you as a 14-year-old to meet those
Yeah.
people. And what were some of the highlights of the journey and the people and everything for you?
So many. I mean, I tell this story a lot, Jeff, and I still do to this day. I remember being at the Ilulissat Ice Fjord. This is a place where you walk up this hill and you look out, and all you see is ice stretched out for kilometers and kilometers as far as the eye can see. And I remember it was 200 of us there, again, scientists, historians, musicians, youth from all over the world. And in that moment, when all of us were just there looking at this ice, all of us went silent for a moment. I still remember the pin drop silence and hearing the ice melting. Millions of drops of the purest water on the planet going into the freshest body of water that exists. And I remember in that moment just feeling so inundated with emotions. I was so joyous and grateful and happy to be able to see such a beautiful thing. But I was also so overwhelmed. You know, again, Jeff, I went into this expedition wanting to solve climate change, telling people that I would find the solution because I'm going to this expedition with all these smart people. And then I see that and I'm like, what can I do? How do I solve the climate crisis? That's one moment that still sticks with me because I remember in the aftermath of that, I think that was maybe relatively early on in the expedition, or we were all the way up in Greenland by that point, actually. So
closer probably to the end.
Closer to the end. I remember that just being such a great way to bring emotions together because I think in the aftermath of that Ilulissat experience, that's when it brought back like everything that I'd learned up until that point, all the connections that I'd been building, all the people that I'd met, like the launch of the National Inuit Youth Prevention Strategy at Hebron. I think that was July 27th, 2016.
Yeah.
That was a very powerful day, a very heavy day, and just so much learning.
That was a very powerful day. Yeah. There was that expedition was full of so much. I love that memory, well, all those memories, but Ilulissat stands out. It is a profound place, isn't it? That really touches you, and it's an intense experience. And as we like to say, sometimes those things touch you in the heart more than the head.
Yeah.
Because you feel it, right?
I think that's it. I felt it, and it was so great to have that level of emotion after having learned so much that previous week and leading up until that point. That, you know, I'd been talking to, I remember David Gray, he was from BC, and I remember playing the piano because there's this beautiful piano on the Ocean Endeavor, and I would play it, and I remember I played a waltz that he knew, and it was just like a Chopin piece that he was really excited about. I remember, you know, Tim Baker just being on the Zodiacs one of those days, seeing the humpback whales. I still have one of Tim's songs that he recorded when he was when we were in the Arctic. Just pop up in my YouTube. Like, those are things that, you know, I still have in my memory, but also show up in my day to day.
You've been haunting these hills from the morning you were born.
That was a really interesting part of the expedition too, I'd say, Jeff, that, you know, I had, yeah, at 14, I think this was really my first time traveling. Like, I think I'd done an overnight camp or something, but traveling so far away from home and being with so many people from not just across Canada, but around the world.
Well, and probably connecting to nature, because I've spent some time in Surrey, and nature doesn't jump out at you. But was that one of those moments where you sort of started to make those connections?
I think so. I think growing up, I feel like I had a strong connection with the environment in the sense that I remember those early outdoor morning walks out in Delta, or...
Yeah, you're close to the ocean.
Every time I visit BC, now living in Saskatchewan, I'm like, mountains, ocean, like 10 minutes away. Like, it's
That's true.
It's
I should
beautiful.
walk that back. I should. Sorry, Surrey. I didn't mean that.
No, it is quite a concrete jungle. Like not a concrete jungle, but there's not a lot of access to green spaces in Surrey. I
Mm,
think that is actually a real issue. And again, as I learn about why certain spaces experience environmental injustice, I think Surrey, in terms of toxic air pollution and not like lack of access to green spaces is somewhere where that shows up. And so I think I didn't really contextualize those things, and I had good connections with the environment, whether it was the water or the forest in BC. But there was something so special about connecting to nature in the way that I did in the Arctic.
mm.
Again, being out on the Zodiacs, right on the water, seeing whales, or going swimming in the Arctic Ocean. I didn't know how to swim, Jeff. I still can barely swim, and so I got neck deep in the water, and I was like, okay, bye.
Probably not the best place to learn,
To
but
learn, no, but it was fun.
well, that awe and wonder, which we need
Yeah.
more of, especially today. It's harder and harder to come across, especially for young people. You were pretty young on that journey, and when you look back, what do you think you learned about yourself during the expedition?
That's a great question.
Also, like, how did it change your relationship, if it did, with nature, with a sort of a sense of
Yeah.
global citizenship? What did it? You were young, but I'm sure it must have impacted you.
Oh, 100%. I think especially connecting and learning from Inuit youth that were on the expedition.
Mm,
Like, I
yeah.
think that was really my first ever exposure to Inuit at all, to Inuit culture and Inuit youth. And I think learning firsthand from my new Inuit friends on the trip as we hung out every day and got to know each other and talked and shared stories. Like, I remember one of the biggest things that I still take back from the expedition, I still talk about to this day, is, and I think just the fact that we were in Hebron for the day of the launch of the National Inuit Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy, like all of that, I think I was already, thinking lots about mental health and suicide, actually, just suicide prevention for my own personal life with friends and just things
Mm,
that I'd read in school. But I think that really helped me understand that, like, this is an issue. And I was, looking back, I'm sad to say that I was shocked to learn about how bad it was. I should not have had to be shocked firsthand to understand that Inuit youth suicide rates are 11 times higher than the national average. But that's something that I learned about on the SOI expedition. And I'm really grateful to have been able to learn that and to have been met with so much care from
mm,
folks that were experiencing that in their communities. And so I think learning about that particular issue, it allowed me to, that in combination with the fact that climate change just has this really clear impact on real communities, on real people. It's not about just the polar bears. I learned in the expedition that polar bears are migrating south, into people's communities. That climate change is causing an uneven melting of permafrost, and that's impacting Greenlandic and Arctic communities. That's having really real impacts on people's lives,
mm,
whether it's inability to or unpredictability of sea ice patterns. Like, those are things that I still think about on the day to day. Honestly, Jeff,
mm.
every
Great.
time I'm talking about how real climate change is, when folks don't understand it or they don't see it. And obviously so much has changed since 2016, just in our conversations and language and experiences of the climate crisis, whether it's Jasper and the wildfires that we saw in 2024, or the smoke from wildfires we see across the country every year. And right now, what's going on in Los Angeles, like, we see the impacts ahead of us. And so in 2016, that was really a powerful moment for me to be able to share directly with people coming out of the expedition. Climate change is happening firsthand to real people today. We need to do something about it. And not just on climate change, on this issue of mental health, on this issue of well-being, on resilience of
Mm,
communities. And it inspired me to, I think, to your question about what did I learn about myself, it inspired me to look internally. Like, why have I not known these things? And what do I do to keep learning? How do I stay on this journey? Because I had such a beautiful experience in the Arctic, learning about myself, learning about others. And I remember just in one of the wrap up activities, maybe a day or two before we came back home, one of the questions that was asked was like, what's one word to describe the expedition for everyone?
mm,
And I don't remember much about the specific activities we did, but I remember that one. And I remember the word that I chose was connection.
That is the word.
It really is. It was an experience, an expedition of connection on every front. And so I think living in a way where I'm connected to myself, to the environment, to people around me. And that's actually really in line with Sikh worldviews. Like this idea of oneness and ik oankar, that we are all universally connected and there is no other.
What do you call it?
It's called ik oankar, and it refers to this universal oneness.
Wow. I need to learn a bit more about that. Connection is the word. If people ask me, Abhay, what the one word is for Students on Ice, it's connection. So I love that you also use that word. 25 years ago when we started Students on Ice, we were barely talking about climate change. We didn't have cell phones. Like, the world's changed so, and since your expedition 10 years ago, it's changed even more. And right around when you came, that's probably when we were talking first and foremost about mental health before we talked about polar bears or penguins. And that's carried on to today because of the deep connection between those two issues. Now you went on to do some pretty amazing things, as we mentioned at the beginning. Tell me a bit about the organization you started, the work that you've been doing.
Yeah. I think dealing and processing many of those emotions on the expedition, I was able to, have that level of overwhelming anxiety about the future, seeing the things that I did, but then have that be accompanied with a level of community, connection,
and hope. I was
and
just
hope.
going to say, like, you exude hope in what you do, which is so awesome. And I applaud you, Abhay, for everything you've done. But how did it all get going, and like, where is it today?
Exactly. Yeah. I think with those emotions, I came back home, and I was telling just my friends, one of my teachers, Michael Aiketa, and a few other folks, just about what happened on the expedition. Like, I was just like, oh my God, I saw polar bears, but I also learned about people, and I was just so excited and so overwhelmed at the same time. But I remember talking to a few of my Inuit peers from the expedition that went back to, Clyde River, Baker Lake, Inuvik, a few other communities, and they talked about how while they were gone, like, suicides had been happening in their community, or suicide attempts. And I think that helped me sort of it grounded me in a sense. It brought me back to reality. I would say after this expedition, I was on a bit of a high, and it helped me remind me that, okay, well, it's not just the expedition that was the work. Now the work starts. Now I use what I learned to do something. And so in talking to my peers, I noticed that a lot of them just didn't understand why it mattered that climate change is impacting mental health, that there's these real impacts in the Arctic. It seemed like a faraway problem. And so I just had the idea, I think I was chatting with my brother and a few friends about what if we just had other people in my high school talk to people in the Arctic in the same way that I got to, and build friendships and build relationships that allow us to care more, but also allow us to understand these different lived experiences. And so that's when my older brother at the time, I think he had the opportunity to travel to Inuvik and work at a school there as a teacher. He also worked at the hospital. And so it was just really great timing, actually, in early 2017, where my brother is a teacher in Inuvik and I, as a high school student in grade 10 at the time, in Delta, British Columbia, like, we started a project called Break the Divide. And the idea was simple, like, let's get my classroom talking to another classroom. And it was very cool. Like, students in the North were very engaged, and students in my classroom were so interested. And we talked about local community issues. And I think the very cool part was, we learned about, and in the South, we learned about climate change, mental health, many of the things that I had learned in my Arctic expedition. But at my high school in Delta, we shared a lot about our experiences of, dealing with things like substance use and drug violence and gang violence in Surrey. Like, that's a big problem, and our own challenges with mental health. And, it's a very diverse community, I'd say, ethnically diverse, racially diverse, in Delta, where I went to high school. And so, we talked about just issues of cultural understanding as well, and experiences of racism. And I think that was something, again, that we didn't have the language to say that we were talking about mental health explicitly and how climate change in the world makes us feel. We weren't talking about eco-anxiety per se, but sharing these collective experiences was really powerful. And so that's how
What's happened since then?
since 2016, 2017, when this first conversation between the North and the South really started, we got some media attention. We had an Instagram page. And all of a sudden in 2017, I remember just having people all over the world actually messaging us on Instagram, having seen the photos from this connection and wanting to do stuff with us. Like we had a student in Cape Town, South Africa, reach out wanting to have connections there. So we started doing video calls between BC and South Africa, talking about the water crisis that was going on in Cape Town at the time. We produced a water video. Locally in Delta, we actually produced an event. We hosted a mental health night event to break stigma around mental health. And we invited parents and community members and teachers, and we had information available in multiple languages so we could bridge cultural understanding as well. Break the Divide had a chapter in Taiwan and a few in Europe and in India. And all of a sudden it was scaling, and that went on until around 2019. It's been such a beautiful journey, though. I think those formative years in high school coming out of the Arctic expedition, the SOI experience led to the creation of Break the Divide in a very concrete way. And it adapted over the years in ways where globally we began to have conversations about climate change and our local experiences and how we felt. That's really what it was.
That's so amazing to hear. I'm so proud of you, Abhay, for what you've done.
Thanks,
and
Geoff.
This is exactly kind of the purpose of a program like Students on Ice, is to be a catalyst and a connector. And so right now, climate anxiety, are you seeing a greater prevalence of that in your generation? What are you doing to now, 9 years later, to solve the climate problem? Do you have a plan? Are you hopeful? This is a crazy time, isn't it? There's so much going on. Like the climate agenda is hitting a rough patch right now in so many ways. So what's on your mind, and what are you busy doing on those fronts?
Just the easy questions, Geoff. 2019 onwards, I did my undergraduate degree at U of T. So I was in Toronto for 4 years, and I double majored in global health and peace, conflict, and justice studies. In 2021, I got research funding at that time, building on a lot of the work actually of Ashley Consolo and Shirley Harper. Ashley Consolo was on our expedition with us.
That's right.
I reached out to her at that point saying, hey, remember me?
There's a connection.
It's another connection that was just Ashley being a world leader in the field of ecological grief, especially with Inuit in Labrador and Nunatsiavut. Like, I remember reaching out then, and I proposed a research project, and we sort of co-developed this as I talked to others in the field. In 2021, we didn't know enough, as much about eco-anxiety as we do today. So in 2021, I did interviews with 30 youth climate activists across Canada to understand experiences of climate emotions. How do people experience the climate crisis? And in that research that I did firsthand, and in just reviewing everything else that was out there, I found that there's just a profound level of anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, fear for the future, but also intense and more complicated emotions like feelings of hypocrisy, feelings of guilt, feelings of curiosity, and also all those positive emotions that can come with climate change. A 2021 study that was released that year that I was doing my research actually shows that in a survey of 10,000 young people around the world, over 70% of young people are anxious about the future. For over 50%, climate change impacts people's day-to-day functioning. And so considering all of that, with Break the Divide, over the years, I think through COVID and in 2021, there were definitely some slower periods, especially as I was busy with my degree. But in 2022, 2023, that's when I sort of came at this work from a renewed focus, having had the academic education and research experience that I had now had doing this research and looking at the literature, but also talking to educators, talking to people that work in this space firsthand. And I think at that point, it became very clear that there's a very big gap in interventions for eco-anxiety. Like, we don't really know what to do with such an anxious population. So absolutely, Geoff, I'd say young people are disproportionately impacted by these mental health impacts of climate change, and also often view the world through the lens of climate change. And what I mean by that is, you might be walking down the street and you see a car, a gas guzzling car, and that triggers eco-anxiety because you question why you don't have more walkable cities, and why are things so car centric. And then you go to a coffee shop and you get a plastic cup, and you recognize that there's a systemic issue at play here, And so I think for myself, as Break the Divide has developed over the years, in 2023, what we did was we were fortunate to get a $25,000 grant, and that was really big. And in 2022, I believe it was also I was a part of the SOI climate action
Yeah, you
cohort.
were. That's right.
That was, yeah. And so that was also a really great experience for me to dive deeper into my understanding of this topic and build programming. So I worked with a few folks in Vancouver and in BC to co-host a conference at Simon Fraser University about eco-grief. 2024 came around, and last year, Break the Divide, using some of the grant funding that we'd received in 2023, we launched our first proper iteration of a climate emotions program. This was taking everything that we had done since 2017 and having these informal dialogues and added some structured facilitation to it. So we trained 14 youth dialogue facilitators from across the country, so youth in their 20s, to be trained as facilitators of climate emotions conversations. And then we worked with 14 schools across the country in BC, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick to facilitate conversations. Firstly, to teach students about climate change and climate emotions, to give people language and terminology to share their emotions and understand how they feel. But also to talk about identity and community, to allow students to connect to who they are, who their communities are, and what are the unique knowledge attributes of their communities. And we also had a really exciting virtual connection component where students from school A and school B would connect through video calls to learn about one another. That was a bit logistically complicated, but we made it work. And we had students in BC talking to kids in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick with Ontario and Ottawa and Toronto, and just these really great connections. And so building on that experience, and I think that fellowship that I received this past year from the Walking Softer organization and the Lawson Foundation, a Canadian organization.
Yeah, I know them.
With some of their funding, now I'm really excited at the stage that Break the Divide has set. Like, I'm doing my master's in educational psychology here in Saskatchewan, training to be a psychologist, actually. And as I do that, I'm using those skill sets to build Break the Divide and create trauma-informed, mentally health-informed programming at the high school level, to go into schools across the country, support educators and high school students with learning about connection to environment, connection to self, connection to people around them, and connection to action and emotions. And how do we take climate action in a way that's emotionally informed? So you asked, Geoff, am I hopeful?
And?
Yes. I think, right, like, I often think about just how a big part of our fight against the climate crisis is a fight for our future, right? And a big key part of that is building resilience, building systems where we're not just mitigating the effects of climate change, but we're adapting to the future that's inevitably coming. We are set for over 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That's in the cards. But that doesn't mean we give up, because every degree of mitigation, but also every effort that we make for adaptation, allows us to live in a world where we take care of one another, where society is more just, where things are more sustainable, where there's a level of equity in how we treat one another. That's the world that we're building towards. So instead of running away from the threat of climate change, building forward, I think is what we need to be doing. And so a key part of resilience and building these resilient communities is adaptability, or a synonym for adaptability is flexibility.
Flexibility is the key.
Flexibility is key. And so just recognizing that communities in the Arctic, communities all over the world, Indigenous communities in the global South, have been experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis for decades. This isn't a new thing. And that's what the SOI expedition really illuminated for me, that climate change is not some new thing that just because I was learning about it in 2015, 2016, now it matters. People have been adapting for decades, for a very long time, especially in
the speed of that change is increasing. But we need mitigation, we need adaptation, but we also need hope. And I love how you're tying that all together. In fact, we might need to get you back on an SOI expedition, Abhay, this time as one of the education team. Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be incredible. I would say, Geoff, the thought has crossed my mind to reach out once I'm done my schooling.
Well, I guess we're getting close to that, aren't we? So let's talk. But what you're doing is so important. It's so needed. You probably saw that book that's just come out recently called The Anxious Generation. Not sure if you've read that, but it is like it's climate, it's environment, it's social media, it's screen time.
Yeah.
And when we talk about connection, I think we have to talk about disconnection at the same time, don't we? try to disconnect from some of that to connect to those other things that really matter more. That's a daunting challenge. I have 2 teenagers, and we deal with that pretty much on a daily basis.
Yeah.
They're great kids, but
The system's set up, the world's set up in a way where it's hard to disconnect.
it is. Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
well, even on Students on Ice, probably when you came, we had a no technology policy. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And
But then you sneaky guys start saying, "Well, this is my phone or this is my camera." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you need that for your camera, right?" So,
yes.
and luckily at the time there wasn't much connectivity anyway, so your phones didn't work. But that has
No.
changed now.
Oh, wow. Okay. I really valued, honestly, just not being able to talk to the outside world, right? I would write blog posts actually in that room, the computer room, because I didn't bring my own laptop with me. I would write blog posts every day to just share with the world what I was doing. And I remember,
Have you ever gone back to read those?
I haven't. I think I will, Geoff. I think I will.
If you can't find them, we probably have them, so we'll
Okay.
dig them up. And on that note, Abhay, as a member of the Students on Ice alumni community, now that's quite global, have you kept in touch with some of the people that you met back in 2016?
Absolutely. I think in terms of just the ongoing connections that have happened on, Facebook or Instagram, where I see what people are up to and I follow along. But I think the very active connections too, the collaborations that have happened, like Jasveen Brar, who was on the expedition with
Yeah.
us, and that was Jasveen's second expedition. And, she was someone that was really like a mentor to me, and her leadership in the climate sector over these years has been very
Absolutely.
wonderful to see. And as I build as I'm now the executive director of a young growing nonprofit, I'm in the stage of development where I'm planning on chatting with funders in 2025 and growing this programming, showing the metrics, the impact analysis, doing all of those
metrics.
strategic things.
Yes.
I've been able to lean on folks from the expedition. I remember while I was at U of T in Toronto, I met Robert Andragna, and learning from him and his experience. And another 2-time expeditioner. Like, I think just the youth, Andrea from Baker Lake, and just her leadership. And in 2019, I was named Canada's Walk of Fame Community Hero Award winner.
Stop.
That was a very cool experience, Geoff. And I was in Toronto at the time, but I was able to bring out Andrea from Winnipeg at the time. I think she was living to Toronto for that award ceremony event. And that was November 2019, just a beautiful event. And so I think the richness of this network, whether professionally or personally, has shown up again in my life many, many times.
I'm so happy to hear that. And it's so great to hear those names. Andrea, love her. I'm going to have to pick up the phone here to call some of these people when we're done. What's your long-term goal here, if you have one? It's great. And by the way, don't hesitate to reach out in these next steps of building Bridge the Divide, because we would love to help any way we can.
Thanks, Geoff. Yeah.
If there's an opportunity there. But what would be your message today to close out, perhaps on this bigger issue of youth and climate? And where do we go from here?
I think for myself, I'm really excited to continue building Break the Divide and be on this journey of creating more connected, empowered, and resilient communities. Like, I think that's really the work that I want to be in. And I think personally in my degree and my education, I'll be a licensed psychologist here in Saskatchewan within the next year and a half or so. And that ability to work with people one-on-one, and not just talk about climate change, but again, talk about these intersecting crises from the world. We're in the midst of a poly crisis, whether that's the climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, but also crises like a mental health crisis. We have housing shortages and housing, grocery costs are inaccessible. Like, we see these big issues. And obviously people are not doing well with seeing these big issues. I believe that young people have a lot of power. And I think as we center our emotions and our responses, emotions that are rooted in a state of connection, a state of sort of care and love, that can make the world of a difference in terms of understanding different communities, building solidarities with different communities, and seeing those struggles, those fights as your own. I think that was a big shift that's happened for me, coming out of SOI and moving beyond that. Yes, I wanted to do something for Inuit youth, to do something about suicide prevention. Going into the expedition, I wanted to solve climate change for those communities. but getting to know people, they're my people, they're my friends, and people in Ottawa, people in BC, people across the world are my people. There is no divide there. Like, we got to break those divides that do exist. And so I think finding ways to see people as people, but recognize the realities of people's struggles, the systemic impacts that the systemic trauma, the systemic and historical injustices that go on to this day, like, those are real. And so we can see people as people, recognize how these things have intergenerational impacts at times, how these problems continue to persist, and address the root systems that are causing these issues in the first place. I think that's the work that I want to be involved in. And I believe in the power of my generation and future generations, but also intergenerational collaboration. I mean, that was a beautiful part of the SOI experience. Learning from older folks and having young people all together.
You are an example of the power of young people. Your voice is really powerful, Abhay. I'm so just inspired by you, to be honest. Keep doing what you're doing. I think you're going to gain a lot more champions that listen to this today. But thanks so much for coming on the greatest classroom on earth.
I love the name.
Well, you lend credence to how it is. I think it's the greatest classroom on earth. So thank you so much. Any final words before we say goodbye?
Well, thank you for having me, Geoff. Thank you to the team for making this possible. And congratulations on 25 years of SOI. That is such a huge achievement. And I know, wow, like the number of people impacted and just the scaling, how much that impact has scaled. I think that's something that I've come to, I've in my own life, just that, you can start small. And I think for young people, the message that you can make impact locally, and actually impact and making change is often the most powerful when it's done in places where you care about it a lot, where you have a certain gift or passion that you bring to it, and in a space or in a community where you already have influence, where people care about you and you care about them. That's, I think, the world that I want to build, where we are caring for one another. And I think SOI has been a great embodiment of that, a great example of that, and something that's inspired me. And I'm excited to build on that moving forward. I
really look forward to keeping in touch, Abhay. And as you may know, we're going to have a 25th anniversary alumni summit in October. And a big part of that will not just be to celebrate the last 25 years. It's going to be to really look forward and support everything that everybody's doing. So put that in just block off October right now until we get the exact date. So thanks again, Abhay. And I want to thank the wonderful Sarah Harmer for our theme song, Lancaster Sound, aka Talarutiup Imanga.
When the herd closes in and break your heart in two, breathe in.
The song you're hearing now is Breathe In, composed and recorded on that 2016 Arctic expedition. It features Ian Tamblin, our resident musician on many Students on Ice expeditions, along with one of our students, Shauna Dicker from Nain Nunatsivu.
Let it go, the pain. There's nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Dig deep.
Thank you very much, Ian and Shauna. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a review and rating where you listen. And share a link of this episode with friends and family. It's the best way to make sure these conversations reach as wide an audience as possible. To learn more about our work, go to studentsonice.com and give us a follow on social media. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Geoff Green.
Let it go. Let it go. The pain. There's nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Dig deep. Find your ground. Hear the voice inside yourself and shout it out loud. Breathe in. And when the hurt closes in and break your heart in two, breathe in. Take your time forgiving for the ignorance they do. Breathe in. Let it go. Your will. Breathe in.